immediately met by ICE agents to deport them or detain them to be deported immediately. So they're putting themselves at risk even by raising the claim, it would seem, in terms of their own immigration status and ability to stay in this country. I want to bring NYU law professor and former clerk to Justice Sotomayor, Melissa Murray. What's your reaction, Melissa, to this ruling?
I think this is a really huge win for the Trump administration. I'm glad that we're talking about it in those terms, because I think one of the great fears with this case was that if the court did not say anything about the substance and scope of the 14th Amendment, media would say that the court had saved birthright citizenship. The court has not saved birthright citizenship. It simply kicked that can down the line and made the legal conditions under which a future suit over birthright citizenship can actually be resolved. Leah is exactly right. This is a huge win for the Trump administration because the court has essentially kneecapped lower courts from stopping this administration when it engages in lawless and unconstitutional behavior. And Lisa makes a really important point. This is all happening in an environment where the Trump administration is not only going after undocumented persons and deporting people without the benefit of due process. They're doing so while they are also upending the legal landscape, but making it harder for pro bono outfits to secure the help they need from law firms to bring these suits. And now with this decision, they're essentially saying that litigants will have to file in each particular jurisdiction around the United States in order to be clear that their resolution will have legally binding effect. And that means you're just going to need a flood, an army of lawyers at a time when that army of lawyers is not going to be forthcoming. So make no mistake about this. The court has given this administration an enormous win. They have put one hand behind the backs of those who are trying to fight against this administration, and they have dealt a death blow to the rule of law.
Let me read from the opinion written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Quote, the bottom line, the universal injunction was conspicuously non-existent for most of our nation's history. Because the universal injunction lacks a historical pedigree, it falls outside the bounds of a federal court's equitable authority. So, Melissa, what do you make of that argument?
So a couple of things here. This is the sort of case that you would have expected Chief Justice John Roberts to write the majority opinion for. The fact that Justice Barrett is writing for the court in this case suggests that maybe she extracted some concessions from the majority in order to be the author here, in order for them to keep her vote. So maybe there are some underlying dynamics here that her authorship might suggest. But this question about the history of the nationwide injunction, I think, is a little misleading here. It's true that we did not necessarily have nationwide injunctions at the founding, but we also didn't have a government that was able to do the sorts of things that modern government does today, the sorts of things that a nationwide injunction might be useful for. People like Mila Sahoni at Stanford University have shown that at least since the emergence of a modern administrative state, we have had universal injunctions. So this isn't a new phenomenon. This isn't something that was recently invented. It is something that has arisen as government has expanded. And so I think this is a little disingenuous on the part of Justice Barrett, who should know better.
And Julia, of course, this impacts people right now who are looking at this decision. And you've done reporting within the immigrant communities. What does this mean for someone born in the U.S. to undocumented parents and for the pregnant immigrant women who are part of this lawsuit?
Well, like so many guests have said, the court here, the justices, did not weigh in on the merits, but they're merely kicking the can down the road. They are staying those injunctions, of course, only, and the fact that they were nationwide. They're not weighing in on the constitutionality. But in the majority opinion, Justice Barrett did say, look, this isn't to go into effect until 30 days after this opinion. So it does leave open the window that in 30 days, unless there is major movement and district courts, not only the district courts that brought these, where these cases were brought, but also in other courts around the country, that it very well could be that an undocumented immigrant or even on someone who is in the country legally but temporarily, if they don't have a green card, which happens very often, you may have a temporary status, you might be seeking asylum, that if you have a child here, they would not be a U.S. citizen. And the question also becomes then, what is the citizenship of the country where this person's from? Did they grant it based on the nationality of the parent? Or could you have a situation where there are simply children born in this country who don't have a real citizenship, where that is in question? This, of course, is something that's been enshrined in the 14th Amendment, and it's not something that the Trump administration argued should have been overturned. They merely argued that the courts were going too far here. And of course, this could definitely work in other issues having to do with immigration. I'm thinking about whether or not there could be asylum policies that are put on hold in certain states, but say Texas allows the Trump administration to move forward, but California doesn't. It could mean immigrants go to certain states based on the laws in those areas. It could overwhelm some states and their social systems while keeping immigrants out of other states. It really could parse up the country. I'm having deja vu here for a moment, Anna, because I covered the Dobbs decision, which obviously parsed the country on the issue of abortion. And so time and time again, we're seeing times where it depends where you are in this country. And on the issue of immigration, if there are immigrants who go to certain states for certain benefits, that really could have an undue burden on certain social systems in certain states. And on a number of immigration issues, the Alien Enemies Act, we know that the one place where the Trump administration could not deport people without due process was the Northern District of Texas. And so they moved men to that facility in the Northern District of Texas to try to get them out immediately. The Supreme Court did stay that, but it could come back again. It's still on the emergency docket. So all of that to say, this will have big impacts not only on this issue, but on a number of issues. There's one more thing I wanted to read for you, Anna, and that is where Justice Barrett calls out Justice Jackson, who wrote the dissent, and said, "We observe only this, that Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary." So what this falls down to, at least inside the court, maybe not what Americans are thinking when they're looking at the practical implications of this decision, but there's a real debate going on in this country and in this court over whether or not courts have more power than the president. And if you think about it, that's the exact argument that the Trump administration and the exact fight that they've been wanting to have since the beginning, since they went to the court just down the street from here, the district court in D.C., and argued to Judge Boasberg they should be able to deport people to El Salvador without due process. They should be able to deport people to Guantanamo Bay. It's this idea that judges cannot stand in their way because the executive is more powerful than the judiciary. And right here, we do have the judiciary handing more power to the executive today, Anna.
Yeah, in fact, I want to read some more from the majority opinion, again, written by Justice Barrett. And I quote here, "Federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to." Chuck, this sounds like a major check on the judicial branch in terms